What is the most supernatural or unexplainable thing that has happened to you? Serious. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was little, I used to stay over at my grandmother's all the time. She would make me a pallet out of blankets on her living room floor, and she would always sit with me and rub my back until I fell asleep. Once, when I was 5 or 6, I woke up in the living room alone. Now, this was an old and isolated farmhouse. Cornfields and no other houses surrounded her, so it was very dark. I had a moment where I forgot where I was. I remember I was laying on my back and I sort of half propped myself up my arms, looking ahead of me toward her big TV cabinet, but I couldn't see much. I then rolling over onto my belly to look behind me in a sort of propped up seal position. As soon as I turned over, I was looking straight at a little girl who was standing at the head of my pallet looking down at me. She was a bit older looking than me with dark curly hair, and she was wearing an old-fashioned dress, but not one that went to the floor. It sort of stopped at her ankles. The weirdest thing was that I wasn't afraid of her. I was confused and a little timid, but mostly curious. She had a soft bluish-whitish glow around her. I wouldn't call it a light because it didn't really shine out, more just encased her, for lack of a better word. She was just looking at me, and she also had a sort of curious, intrigued look in her face. I don't know how long we stared at one another, not a very long time for sure, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I very slowly and softly reached out my hand to touch her. Before my hand could get close to her, she dissipated. She did not disappear. It was more like watching water turn into a stream cloud. But this cloud was made of tiny little spheres, or particles, the same shade of bluish-white that encased her, and moving as a unit, the cloud of spheres moved to the window floating and went through the glass and out of my line of sight. Seeing that triggered my fear response, and I literally screamed, "Grandma!" She rushed in quickly and tried comforting me by saying it was a dream. It absolutely was not a dream. I was too awake and aware, and it couldn't be sleep paralysis because I moved too much. When I was several years older, Grandma confided in me that she knew the house to be haunted. She said she would see a tall shadow pacing the hall. The doors would rattle or shake when nobody was home but her. Alone in the house, she'd hear footsteps and voices in my grandpa's old study, and a little dark-haired girl would run by the windows in her living room. Creepy stuff, man. I have had experienced a lot of unexplainable things, but the most by far happened a few years ago. I was sitting on my couch knitting, and behind me is a desk and desk chair. I feel and hear someone running behind me. I turn quickly, thinking it is my kid, but nothing is there and the desk chair was slightly spinning. I kind of had a moment and looked throughout the house and everything was fine, and I pushed it out of my mind and I continued to knit. Then, from the corner of my eyes, I see this figure staring at me, peering from the side of my couch. I look and I see it disappears. It was a little blonde boy with bright, almost glowing blue eyes and greenish blue-gray face and a dark purple smile. I was on a camping trip with my school. At night, we put on a campfire and we were all having fun. Suddenly, we heard someone screaming for help. That person sounded like a classmate of ours. I think his name was Kato. I'm half Japanese, and at the time I was in Japan. We came to the spot, we heard him scream, and then we again heard him saying, "I am here, help me." We rushed there only to see a shed. Then we saw him running to us asking, "What are you all doing here? I was so scared and I heard you all screaming, so I came here to see if you were okay or not." Our teacher fainted, and I was so effing scared that my soul left my body for a second. When I was young, I thought I lived multiple lives. It's like my first memory was about an apartment building, me stuck in a box doing Christmas, then dying in a fire. Then I'm transported into an elevator and I live for 4 years until I'm 6. Then my whole world flips upside down after me and my mom walk out of a store, and boom. Then I have my first memory of me witnessing my parents sitting on a couch holding my mom's pregnant stomach at 4 years old. Until I was 18, I almost convinced myself that I would lose all of my progress in this world and have to start again. It felt so real, and I still have these memories, and I don't know if that was just my subconscious being weird or if that was my universe rebooting multiple times before it landed on this one. I have a twin. Occasionally, she and I will experience physical manifestations of each other's pain or injury. She once got into a car crash and the airbag blew up in her face. We both woke the next morning with black eyes. I was not in the accident. I blew out my ankle and she couldn't walk for 2 weeks. People think we're full of shit because there's no explanation. It doesn't happen every time one of us gets hurt, but it's happened maybe half a dozen times in almost 40 years. Working at the school job I got now, the building empties at about 6, and for some reason the second floor is wood floors and you can hear anyone walking, yet when I'm the only person in the building, I hear someone casually walking. Never actually saw anyone, just hearing it. There's this light that hovers beyond the cornfield across from my house. It used to be rainbow, then it was pink for a while, and now it's rainbow again. I just see it every now and then, maybe once or twice a month. It usually hovers there at night, but I've seen it leave a couple times. It just flies away off to the west. I saw it a few days ago, actually. I was staying on the Queen Mary for a wedding with my now husband. We get back after the wedding and lay down and go to bed. I fall asleep pretty fast, but my husband keeps tossing around and telling me to stop poking his back. I assume he is just messing with me. It goes on long enough that I eventually get fed up and we both half sit up, and I'm in the middle of telling him how could that possibly have been me when all of a sudden the headboard slams into the wall. It was so effing loud, like someone punched it into the wall. We felt it shake. We both scream and go quiet. Spent the next hour with the lights on talking ourselves into how it had to be the people to the next room. Definitely wasn't, because we heard them come back to their room an hour later and have sex. Haha, very thin walls. We finally get up the nerve to turn off the lights and try to sleep. We both notice one corner of the room just looks darker than the rest of this room. Nothing else happened, but when we checked out, we mentioned what happened to the front desk. The woman looked at our room number, smiled, and handed us a paper with all the haunted rooms and descriptions of what happens in each one. Our room was number 3 on the list, and the most common experiences were being poked or nudged, loud bangs, and dark shadows. I never really believed in ghosts, but that was wild. I am a big fat scaredy cat and don't watch horror movies. I can tolerate some suspense, but I don't like feeling scared because I get panic attacks easy. Well, in high school, my friends wanted to watch this horror movie, can't remember which one, and were insisting I watch it too. During the movie, I was ready to walk out of the room if I started to feel anxious. I was sitting on the edge of the bed with one foot stretched on the bed and one hanging on the side. When the scary part of the movie happened, demon appears, screaming, loud suspenseful music, etc., I felt 2 hands grab my thigh muscle of the leg that was on top of the bed and legit tied a knot with it. That is the best explanation I have for what I felt. And when I tried to get up and stepped with the hanging foot, I felt a hand grab my ankle and swoop me off balance. I fell so hard on the ground I had a bruise on my hip for several days. I was yelling in pain and showed my friend my thigh, which had a big lump. One of my friends massaged it for a bit and the swelling went down and I felt better. We were all freaked out because all of that happened during a moment in the movie with very intense music was playing, and when the music died down, so did my pain. It was late one night and I was walking over to the kitchen to get a midnight snack when I see a dark brown cat tail peeking out from the wall. I was confused, as my last cat, who had a dark brown tail, had died 2 years ago. I thought it was one of my cats with orange tails, but when I entered the kitchen, neither of them were anywhere to be seen. I know this was not as scary as some of the stories on here, but it made me really miss her. Rest in peace, Allie. Went to a children's cemetery a few years ago with a bunch of buddies. It was a cooler, clear fall night when we got there, and as soon as we stood watching, we saw what looked like clouds walking between the headstones. No real defined shapes, but they looked like they were walking and roughly person-shaped. We, all 7 of us, heard a little girl giggling and what sounded like a rope creaking from weight being dropped on it. All of the clouds were around the big oak tree in the middle of it and looked like one was hanging off a branch. We noped out of there. On our way out, I saw 4 red glowing eyes in the back seat of my truck. Nothing in the truck was red or orange, and as I was driving, I could feel someone running their hand on my face, fingers under my jaw back to my ears. My night got a lot weirder after that. I didn't sleep for 2 days following, and I still get nightmares from it. Went to a psychic a few months after my grandpa died with my parents. The woman was proving that what she does is legit by saying things that we'd never had told her, aka pointing to Mom and saying, "You have 3 children, 2 beautiful girls, and a very handsome boy." At the time, she had 3 girls, me and my 2 sisters, so she was wrong. Didn't think much of it until a month later when I came out as trans to my parents, leading to my mom having 2 girls and a boy. Might just be a coincidence, but I think that's pretty interesting. Lived in a sinister haunted house for a couple of years when I was younger. Lots of unsettling things happened over the few years there, but one that I remember with full clarity is late one night. I got out of bed to use the toilet, and while I was in there, I heard a stranger's voice, deep and male-sounding, laughing. Hard to explain, but I felt that it was laughing at me. I was already a nervous wreck in that house, so this didn't help, and I stayed in the bathroom crying for what felt like hours. Eventually, I must have woken up my mom because she came and found me, convinced me to open the bathroom door, and took me back to my room. I vividly remember her tucking me back into bed and staying with me for a while because I was so upset. The next morning, and every time after that I've mentioned it, she has zero recollection of getting up that night. But I definitely used the bathroom because I used to unravel the loo roll way too far and constantly got told off for letting it drag on the floor, which is what I'd done that night. Weird house. Back in 2009, a thief tried to break into our home where we had newly transferred. My mom screamed when she saw the dark figure behind the iron gates, and the person disappeared into nothingness soon after. The thing is, she saw that same guy, a young man, walking down the road in the afternoon, and he was floating a good 2 inches above the ground, barely even moving his legs, and staring into the abyss of nothingness. We confided with our neighbors, who confirmed that all of them had seen that figure at some point or the other in their life, and the person would appear only once to each individual. Guess this is a local phenomenon. We shifted to another place after living there for a year. Went to an old farm-style graveyard church at night with some friends. Some of the headstones were supposed to have some kind of gem or stone that reflected. Was well known in the area, but I'd never been there. We went at night in my truck. It was so dark you could hardly see. My one friend told me where to go, and we quickly came around a turn, and the church or gravestones were all of a sudden in front of us. I stopped the truck, and within seconds, the truck turned off as if someone cut the power feed. No interior lights, no ignition switch, radio, etc. Buddy started freaking out, and me turning the key or trying the lights didn't do anything. It maybe lasted a minute. Then all of a sudden, everything in the truck turned on. Dash lights, exterior lights, radio. When the truck turned back on, I was looking at the cluster and then looked up. A huge black bird, wingspan close to the width of the truck, came out of nowhere and straight at my windshield. It let out a loud noise, maybe a caw, as it flew up over my windshield. Once it passed, you could see the church and reflective tombstone gem thingies. Scared the living F out of us. Started the truck and took off home. Never forget that. Definitely had a someone is there with us vibe when the truck died and shut off. This happened when I was a lot younger, like 5, but I still remember it vividly. I was at my grandparents' house for whatever reason, I believe Father's Day. My grandparents had a cat. His name was Buddy, and I effing loved that cat. Buddy had passed about 4 days prior to Father's Day, and me being 5, I kinda knew the meaning of death. My grandparents had this windowsill facing the front yard. Me being lanky, I'd sit on it with a toy and watch the birds on the feeder. I looked to my left and down their hallway. I see the slight silhouette of Buddy. I remember just being in shock and pointing at the cat, then seeing the silhouette fade away. My mom noticed me and was seeing if I was all right. I just pointed down the hallway, and she was confused because she saw nothing. But yeah, that's all I remember of that. One of my cousins passed away due to a sudden cardiac arrest, so I decided to drive to his city to offer condolences to his family and be with them during the difficult time. It was a long drive from one end of the country I'm living in to another. Along the journey, in the early hours of the morning, I started to fall asleep behind the wheel. I fell into a vivid dreamlike state where I was still semi-conscious, but barely. I had some strange dream or vision of me having a car accident along the same road, and that I was looking at my destroyed vehicle from third-person view, which was also on fire, and I was trapped inside of it. I felt a very strange sadness and goosebump feelings as I looked at the scene. Suddenly, I heard a panicked, loud voice of a stranger. "Wake up!" It sounded like an older lady and had a sense of urgency to it. I literally got shook and woke up immediately. I noticed that I was speeding toward a red traffic light with about 2 or 3 cars parked behind it 100 yards out. The visibility had been very poor and the road was empty, and I didn't notice any cars in front of me before then. I don't know where they came from, as there was literally no adjacent side roads leading up to the light they could have slipped in from. I then parked in the first side road and saw after the light and rested for a few hours. I am not a religious or spiritual man, but my partner at the time was convinced that it was a guardian angel.